think this is okay.
Okay. All right. I'll leave it then.
Dan, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you guys doing?
We're hanging right in there, I suppose. Today's a good day. I found out I just got a job, so that's always good stuff.
Well, that means money in the pocket. That could be good.
I would hope so.
There's nothing like having money in the pocket.
No, you're absolutely right. My wife she has a really good job, so we've kind of lucked out, but it's been weird. I've been off work for a year. I'm a kind of stay-at-home dad right now.
What do you do?
Well, before I moved to Colorado, I was the manager of a building supply store.
Oh.
And now, I guess you could call me a podcast host for
well,
what that's
what
worth.
we're doing here. I mean,
yeah.
Let me get my hat straight here.
Hey, you're good.
He gave me a new one today. Mine was dirty, so I said, you know what? Because I do wear it quite a bit.
Yeah. So well, you're going to have to get all over Ron. I don't have a Roadrunner hat yet.
Right?
Yeah.
And I got to have something to cover all this.
Well, that will help you there. You can get a little bit of sunshine up there. Sean, what do you do?
I am super boring as far as job goes. I'm a medical coder.
Oh, I'm familiar with that. Yes. And it's very much needed.
Yeah. And it's a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that a lot of people don't see. So,
yeah, it's important though, because I know if you don't have that, we don't have records and we don't have any way to share them and all that stuff.
For sure.
And Lord knows we don't have any need for coding right now. I mean,
yeah.
By the way, Ron told me to tell everybody hi today.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping Ron would be able to jump on with us today. I like Ron. He's a good fella.
He is. Known him a long time. TJ and him and me, we hung out together quite a bit. So,
well, Ron tells me you might know a thing or two about catching crappie.
Well, he lies now and then. You know, I don't know. You know, yeah, I'm all about catfish and all that. No, I'm not. I'm a crappie guy.
So if you wouldn't mind a little bit, let's kind of dig back in your history just a fuzz. Where'd you grow up?
Cape Girardeau, just south of Cape Girardeau, Missouri, in the Boot Hill, Missouri, a little town called Scott City. I grew up on the Mississippi River, almost within 2 miles, and went to a little high school there and graduated, and immediately went off into the University of Southeast Missouri State and got drafted in. Would have been drafted in the Army in Vietnam, and so instead of going there, I went in the Air Force, finished my degree, and it's all history. 25 years of Air Force, and then retired and became a business owner doing Air Force work and doing commercial work. So that's what I am now. Own a couple of companies and professionally fish for crappie. Used to be an avid bass fisherman for years and years and years. Did the FLW and BASS and Federation and all that kind of stuff, and then. As some of us, as we get older, will do, learn that there's other avenues of fishing, and got into promoting crappie. And TJ got me immersed into it with a couple of owners of some companies that were owning tours at that time. And it's all history from there. I started fishing and won 2 championships with Bill Braswell, 2 Angler of the Year championships back to back. It's almost unheard of. So, I'm very fortunate to have fished with him and been actually cut my teeth with him coming out of the bass world. And so we promoted, do a lot of seminars, do a lot of shows, do a lot of virtual shows now. And in fact, I'll be doing Canada's big show, virtual seminars and all that. Made really good friends up there, spreading the word on crappie. So I have learned after touching base with all these people and like you and other people around the world, that it's a fantastic world out there for fishermen and getting to know everybody. And I'm a publisher too of Crappie Now and Catfish Now magazines. Both are e-zines, and we've got a big, huge following in that. So it keeps me pretty busy, you know, with all these little dishes being bounced around in the air, you know, and trying to fish too. So, but anyway, thanks for asking.
I'd imagine.
So I think it'd be safe to say. I was just going to say it's safe to say that you might know a little bit about what we're going to ask you.
Just a little bit. You know, I might be able to help you a little bit.
Okay, all right.
After I get done with you guys, I got to go to Bass Pro and and they won't let us do seminars this year for Crappie Madness, but I'll be over there actually helping people out in the aisles for all evening and then most of tomorrow. So, and I do that every year along with other seminars around the country. So this year we're a little bit curtailed, just like last year. It's kind of nipping it in the bud, but this is a good way to do it, guys, right here.
Oh, that's what we've discovered. I live vicariously through guys like you. It always amazes me that someone can get a job being a professional fisherman, and I'm not that good. So I have to just look at you guys and go, oh man, that's so awesome. And think about how cool it'd be.
I love those sunrises and sunsets, and my wife gets to fish with me. She retired. So when I'm on the trail, not working in the office as I am right now, you know, it's really great to get out there and see what God has created, which is absolutely awesome, man. I mean, you know, to get up in the mornings and do that, and see those sunrises and then see the sunsets and know that I got to go out there and catch some big fish, you know, and just have a great time. And it's really calming, and everybody needs to do that.
You grew up in the Midwest, obviously, right there, you know, what I would consider the kind of the heart of the Midwest. Did you grow up fishing? I mean, obviously being right there by the Mississippi River, was your fishing panfish? Did it start off bass, catfish?
Catfish. In fact, anything that would bite. What happened was my grandmother, long story, but anyway, my grandmother got me into it, and then my dad as well, but mainly my grandmother. And she was from a little bitty town, and we would fish anything, ditches and marshes and all those things that are in southeast Missouri in the bottoms. You know, there's a lot of bottom fish. We fished for bowfin and catfish and bluegill, and we caught a few crappie now and then, a few bass, and but cane poles. Started out fishing with cane poles, and I wrote an editorial in one of my editorials about what got me stuck in this fishing and a good thing, and that was my grandmother. I got to lay it on my grandmother that she did it, and she did it to relieve her of some stress, having lost her son at the end of World War II. You know, that's what really drove her into fishing, that she had lost one of hers, and she did the fishing to relieve her of the stress. And then she took me and my brother along everywhere. I never had so much poison ivy in all my life, and poison oak, and because we fished in some of the bottoms and everything. We catch bullhead, and you know, and we cleaned everything except gar. We cleaned pretty much everything. Even turtles, big snapping turtles, did not escape all the time. So
Well,
if it could be cooked, she would do it.
growing up in Southern Ohio, I can't really speak for Sean, but my grandpa, he always said he ate everything but the squeal. And that's,
I like that.
if it didn't eat him first, he was going to eat it. So I can understand that.
Yeah, well, that's what we did. So nowadays, when I see these things, like we were down in Florida fishing, Sue and I, at the first tournament this year on the St. John's, and I've caught some weird looking things on the St. John's. But one of the things that we caught, I told her, I said, there's some great big bullheads on this river system. And lo and behold, if she didn't catch one of those big 5-pound, 6-pound bullheads, and you can't even put your hand all the way over the head. It's so big. It takes two hands, and your fingers won't reach each side. They're that big. And they come up and they eat the roe of the crappie when they go in the spawning beds. And so we caught two of them, and she got to see them firsthand. I mean, they're big.
That's a big bullhead.
That's big bullhead. Let me tell you, they're huge. Of course, most of it's their head, you know, because the bullhead, I guess they get that name appropriately, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, we fished all the little ditches and the drainage, you know, because that was all swampland down there, all cypress swamps in southeast Missouri. So there's a lot of irrigation, or shall we say water relief ditches that keep the Mississippi River at bay, and levees and whatnot. And we'd fish all those, and they had everything in them, you know, as you can imagine, coming out of the Mississippi River. So yeah, love doing it, man. Still do. Been doing it my whole life, and my kids do now. So really happy about it. I love it. That's a great sport.
Oh, absolutely. And you already mentioned your kind of experience with the Bass Pro tournaments, and what was the transition from focusing on bass to crappie? Because in my mind, I don't think of people making that transition. It'd probably be the other way.
Oh no, there's a lot of people that get in the later stages of life. I'll put it that way.
Okay.
For us older people, having been in the military and run every day and exercising every day, your hips and things wear out. Running 6 mile days and all that kind of stuff a lot. And so shoulders also wear out. So I would do 5,000-6,000 casts a day fishing, and loved every minute of it. But you do get to a point where you wear out on some of those functions, and some people don't, but some do. There's a lot of people that transition into the other sports, catfishing and crappie and all that kind of. There's a big following now in crappie, and always was, but it just wasn't organized. So what happened was, one day TJ came to me and said, Dan, we'd really like to expose you to this crappie circuits and these professional crappie tournaments. I had no clue what that was. I was fishing BFLs at the time in Airport Marine up here in Birmingham, Alabama. And I said, okay, why don't you come on over and help us with media and drive media around and, for the boats, for the tournaments, and meet all the fishermen. And I would take the riders out on the boat. So I got to know all the riders, all the videographers. Not much video back then. That was 10 years ago. And so I went and did that. I drove a media boat and actually went out with all the riders, took care of them, and a whole bit for every one of their qualifiers and the championships for 2 years. And I would then go and work my job, and also then do BFL tournaments when they were scheduled and all that. And I was even in FLW as an ambassador. And so I was teaching kids. So the owner of that came to me on the third season at the first tournament in Florida and pulled me aside and said, why don't you come in and fish with Bill Braswell, who's here. He doesn't have a partner. He had a female bass pro who at that time was still, the female bass circuits were still going strong. And before they wiped them away. And so I said, sure, why not? And so, but I couldn't do all of them. The schedule was too heavy. So we fished maybe 6 or 7 that year that I fished with him, and we did quite well. We were in the top 5. So then they asked me to go ahead and go full with it instead of doing the media. Asked me to go ahead and fish with him full time. So that was year 2, and we won the team championship in year 2. And then we got stronger in year 3 and really just wiped them. I mean, we ended up taking, so Bill says, I'm going to retire. I get 2 back to back. I can't do any more than that. So he retired. So I said, I ain't leaving this. So I went alone and fished with Jeff Sweeterman, a good crappie pro out of Texas, Steve Brown from here in Alabama, a few other people, and still with one partner, I fished 5 tournaments with that partner, which it would have been better if I'd had more. And we still placed in the top 5 on the points race and everything. So we're like number 2 or 3. So I really got stuck in it. So I went and got me a full-time partner on that following year after that. And we did quite well for 2 or 3 years. And then Sue and I joined forces 2 years ago and started fishing together. And I fished with Garrett Steele in between. It was a country I asked him to fish with me, Garrett Steele. He didn't really had ever fished crappie. He hadn't really fished that much bass either, but he had fished some. So it was great for the sport. Kept on promoting and promotions and a lot of video work, a lot of things like this, working with media. And now I have a writer's camp that I've done. I'm in my 5th year of a writer's camp. Last year I had to cancel it due to COVID, but this year I'll be having it again. I bring in writers and videographers. And so now I'm working with state tourisms, and there's a bunch of stuff that we're about to release out to the world that's going to be under the Crappie Now umbrella and some state activities in other states. So I really love this sport. This sport means a lot to me. Bass fishing still means a lot. Catfishing, because it heals people that have PTSD. It heals people that are my veteran friends, and along with my friends out in the world who have a lot of financial issues and have other things. You out on the water and you get in the outdoors, you forget all that stuff for that snippet of time. You get relief out of that, and then you can start to deal with other things when you do that. Long story short, sorry about that, Zach, but that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, that's exactly what we're trying to do with 12 Hike, is just expose people to what the outdoor recreation world can do for them. And I didn't realize you were doing all that stuff.
Oh yeah, big in kids stuff. I've been supporting kids tournaments and stuff like that. I was one of the first bass ambassadors to take out kids before they had high school events. We started the first high school supported thing right here in Alabama, right here in my hometown, and I was a boat captain for kids when it was first starting out with Don Day and a bunch of crew. And now it's grown up and it exploded, went to all the high schools and all that kind of stuff, which is awesome to see that bloom. So that's the future for us, having the kids involved in these things to understand the outdoors, and not, especially with all the urbanization that we have now. You know?
Oh, absolutely. When you made the transition from bass to crappie, did you know a lot about crappie fishing, or was it just a general understanding of fish?
No, general understanding. I carried a lot of what my knowledge was. Of course, Bill had quite a bit of knowledge, having been on circuit for years and years and years. But I brought to him a whole new challenging thing in electronics and maps and mapping and my research. I was a big researcher. He was more of a gut fisherman, you know, kind of, I believe they're doing this, or I was more technical. Okay. And so I pushed him out of his comfort zone a lot. and so because I really believe in research before I get to the water and in getting on. So I had a learning curve, and still have a learn. You always learn at this. Now the whole sport's changing with LiveScope, and I'm a Garmin pro, and I was part of that whole transition with Scott Martin before it was sexy to go out and see what LiveScope could do. So I've got to see that whole growth pattern and see all these other guys, and I'm getting to watch all these youngsters come into this with all their gaming skills and all that, and playing with LiveScope, and they are just awesome on it. You know, they really are. So yeah.
And that kind of leads into where I'm wanting to go with this conversation, is trying to help people consistently find and catch crappie. So in your research for a lake, what's one of the first things you do when you're looking at a body of water?
I'm going to get a map of it, you know, either from my Garmin unit, from maps that I may have. I still have a file cabinet full of maps that I had bought over the years. And before I do a new lake or go to even an existing lake, like I'm getting ready to go to Guntersville here in about a week and a half, I get out an old map and I start looking at contour lines and the lay of the lake. I get on satellite and I do a lot of research on satellite, and I want to see any nuances in that lake, you know, as far as contours, underwater. Well, now you can really overcome a lot of that with the LiveScope and getting on the water and just doing a lot of moving and seeing where the fish are holding and how deep. So the first thing I like to do is research the lake, find out where I've got ramps, find out where I've got accesses, where will I be putting in, and how much of a run is it to XYZ, you know, that I may want to fish, you know, and what's the patterns for that time of the year. So then I'll look at the patterns for that time of the year. The color of the water, the temperature of the water is critical, or where you're going to want to go here is critical, and is also part of the mapping of what's going on, along with the moon and nature. Nature will tell you.
As far as temperatures go, what's the water temperature that kind of triggers the really hot crappie bite in the spring?
When you get above 55, right now, I think Guntersville, for example, in our lakes right here, we're sitting in the 40s right now. Which is really low for down here. I mean, we've had a real winter. Mm-hmm. In the past 2 years, it has not been that cold. We've been in the 50s. So the shad population remained. You didn't have die-offs and all that kind of stuff. Across the country, you're going to have die-offs, and that's going to be a really accelerator for some big catches on crappie, because there'll be fewer amounts of food. So I like the real gauge when it gets into 55 degrees. On those northern shores, northwestern shores, if the predominant winds are north-northwest for your cold fronts and whatnot, mm-hmm. then I always teach in my seminars, You want to go to those northwest pockets and banks off where there's deep water, where the river channels come in near there, where they can transition in and out, and look for bait when you go on the water. So before I get on the water, I do all my research, my homework, and I'll zero in on a specific area. And then I'll zero in on what depth are they holding and the color I'm going to use, and then go after them and see what they are really wanting to do.
And obviously having good electronics makes that a lot better. What about in the days, say, pre-electronics? I know you're a big spider rigging fan.
Right. I am.
Sean lives in Ohio. I used to live there. And if I'm remembering correctly, we're not allowed to do that extensive of a spider rigging. We're only allowed
two rods.
Yep.
Per person.
Yeah.
You can still do that. I ran into that in Canada as well when I teach up there, that they can't do very many rods either. I'll tell you quite honestly, I've gone down. Sue and I have gone down to 3 rods on spider rigging a piece, and then if I want to pitch to them on the live scope, I can pitch to them. Which is something I can talk about too. But when that temperature gets above 55. And you start seeing those shad coming up in those warm, sunny days. It can be windy, but in the warm, sunny days, I don't care if you're in Ohio, as long as you don't have hard water, ice. You can find those fish. They're going to be on those warmer banks, where those shad like to come in. They like to warm themselves in that sun. So those crappie will not. Sometimes this time of the year won't even be on anything. They'll just be on wherever the food is. A lot of times. In Florida, where I just came back from, the water temps were they were going 58 to 60 while I was there. So those fish were really wanting to push in. But all the females we caught, except I saw maybe 3 that were ready to go in bed, and most of them weren't even ready yet. I mean, the egg sacs were not ready yet.
Yeah.
And they weren't even close. So when it gets above 55, when it gets to about 58 to 60, you better be watching for the females off the deep ledges where they wintered, and the males could be already in a foot of water. And so the males will come in on that first moon, like this last moon we had last week. A lot of times those males will come in on that moon or the next moon and stay up there even through cold fronts and everything. And they may push off a little bit, and those females will stay off in the deeper water. So if you have a spawning ground where you've caught crappie in the past in the spawning, they're going to frequent those same areas. They don't change up much. So just be aware of when it gets to that 58 to 60, you better be ready to go crappie fishing.
Sean, I've been asking for questions for 20 minutes. You got anything you want to ask? Because
I'm just taking notes.
Yeah, it's all pencil with heat, with a little bit of smoke coming off the top of it there.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a latecomer to crappie fishing. I had a friend back in Ohio before I moved that he took me out one time, and we had a couple of lakes that he had pretty well dialed in. And after that first trip, I was hooked. It is so much fun. We caught between us, I'd say we caught 100 fish.
Yeah.
I've never caught 100 bass in one day, ever.
And if you did, you're doing really good.
No doubt. But the problem for us is, since I've moved to Colorado, now I have a brand new water system that I have to learn, and I'm starting over from scratch.
Right.
So, and as far as Sean goes, I think you've caught crappie by mistake, right?
Yeah, I've never really been able to dial them in. I think it's just lack of trying and lack of experience more than anything. But it's definitely something that I always try. At least one trip a year, I always go out with a mindset of, okay, I'm going to try and catch some crappie, and then inevitably I give up and catch bluegill. But
and our big, I guess our big setback, we don't have electronics, so we have to go out and we almost depend on our guts. So from my experience with crappie, I understand 2 things. 1, they like structure.
Mm-hmm.
And 2, if you can find a boat dock somewhere, you need to fish underneath that thing.
Yes.
But that's it. That's the limit of my knowledge.
And they're not always on boat docks either. There's windows of opportunity. Fall's a great time for boat docks. There in the spring, some will spawn on docks or around docks, depending on, but you got to find the right ones. that have structure, either man-made or were created by wherever they built it. There was natural structure under it. We have lakes here that they'll come in on those docks hot and heavy, and then they're off of them. You're not going to catch them all the time. But you're right. If you had no other structure and no electronics, you're flying blind. Go with your gut as far as if there's a laydown tree, that's they're going to spawn in a laydown tree. And if there's not many laydowns in that lake, then they're going to be on the ones that are there. So, or if you got a pocket that you live on, or if you're near and you have access to and you can walk to it, laydown trees will definitely be a place for these fish will be. But they're not there in the hot summer. They won't stay there. They're going to go off to the deep ledges in any breaks that are out there. But for springtime, those fish will come in there and they're going to follow ledges. And then when they find structure like a tree, or somebody's put in a mossback fish attractor, or they put in Christmas trees, stumps, whatever it may be. In Colorado, by the way, you're not going to find as many lakes there that have crappie in them because of the cold water. You have a lot of cold water. I don't know what part of Colorado you're in.
Northern.
Yeah.
It's cold.
It's going to be a little more difficult for you to find crappie up there in northern Colorado. A lot of trout up there. And walleye, some walleye. Being in the Air Force, I've been to Colorado and New Mexico and all those places, so I'm very familiar. But they are there. I will tell you, there are some lakes in there that are heavier than people realize. And there's like California, there's tons of crappie in California people haven't even touched, and big ones. And they're under the schools of shad, no structure. They're black crappie. Black crappie will follow. The black crappie is known. It doesn't have the vertical bars in it, and they call them specks in Florida because they look like specks. They got black specks all over them, and they get as big as white crappie. And they're different shaped a little bit, and but man, they're alive, man. They're in Colorado has some. Most of your crappie in Colorado are black crappie, and you have to pull for those fish with lines out behind your boat and the whole bit. And I do that a lot. I do a lot of pulling as well. So
that makes me a little bit sad because all I've got is my kayak, and I don't feel like
actually you with your kayak. You get you a little bitty striker, Garmin striker electronic that they've got now kayak rigs for, and kayak also rod holders from Driftmaster for kayaks, because the owner is a big kayak fisherman, and you can actually push and pull right out of your kayak. And a lot of the guys with LiveScope are pitching to them with a B&M pole that's a 7-footer. Like a TCB rod that's a light action rod, using 32nd ounce and 16th ounce Roadrunners, hair jigs, Team Crappie baits with Bobby Garland plastics, and works great. And you can actually pull with your kayak. And I've seen guys do it. Have a little troll motor on there, or they got their pedals and they're pedaling. And they put the rods out on the sides and they're pulling. There you go.
This is my power right here. I don't have pedals.
Oh, you've got the hands.
Yeah.
Oh, the problem is you get a fish on, your power is going away.
Yep, that's the problem. So I'm more of a 1, maybe 2 pole maximum. Like I'll have one on a float and then I'm pitching with the other one.
I got you. I would do a lot of slip bobbering with what you're doing. Go with a Roadrunner, either in with like some of the Team Crappie baits that are in that lineup. I like to use Roadrunners, and what I did in Florida, and if you go to my Facebook page today, you're going to see on Crappie Dan and Dan Dannenmueller, I just posted up some pictures where I was pulling baits with Sue and I with Roadrunner heads, 32nd, 16th ounce, on offshore planer boards, and we were pulling these with hyper grubs, the Bobby Garland hyper grubs that they came back out with a year ago, and they have a really fantastic swimming tail on them, and the crappie can't resist them. The other thing I had a lot of success with was it's the Roadrunner. They come out with the tricolor. They call them the tricolor Roadrunners. They don't really, they don't sell in stores a lot because I don't know why they don't pick them up, but they have triple colors in them. And we caught a lot on chartreuse and white in Florida about a week and a half ago. They just couldn't resist it. So, I mean, we caught 22 keepers above 1.25 pounds just pulling those baits in about 4 hours of pulling.
Wow. See, and you mentioned a couple of techniques there that I think I want to talk about a little bit. Everyone knows that you can put a minnow underneath a slip bobber.
That's right.
And catch fish that way.
Yep.
I am a Roadrunner freaking fanatic. I think it's the best. Okay.
All around.
It's the all around best lure. I've caught more fish on a 16th ounce Roadrunner with a Bobby Garland minnow than anything.
Right.
And it's such an easy bait to use. Flip it out there, let it sink a little bit, find the depth, and once you have that, you can catch them all day. But you were talking about planer boards.
Right.
And that's something I have zero experience with.
The planer board, a lot of the world doesn't, and they think it's so difficult to learn and how to use it, and it's not. It really isn't. The one thing I use why I like planer boards, here's what I do on pulling when I do planer boards, because I can control the depth with speed instead of doing like the Carolinas where these guys are experts in Georgia at pulling and knowing a 32nd ounce bait is going to go this deep with this much line out with this speed, right? Mm-hmm. So you got these variables. You got all those variables I just mentioned. Well, there's an app out now. It's called by Precision Trolling Data. Mark, which is got the show 411 out of northern United States. Mark has gone out and they dive and they watch the baits and they use gauges of how deep the baits will run based on this pound of line, based upon this speed, based upon this weight of jig, all of that. Okay. So most guys pull without boards or any other control. Well, I met the owner here about 4 or 5 years ago, Nick DeShano and Bruce DeShano out of Michigan. And they, for over all the years, had come out with a board for walleye fishing and for Great Lake fishing for, all the different fish that are in the fishery up there and all the surrounding areas. And they were pulling these great big boards. I'm talking about boards that are, 16 inches long, 20 inches long. And a guy from their league in walleye, they were all members of the National Professional Anglers Association, NPAA, which now I'm a big silver sponsor with Catfish and Crappie Now. And all these people, including the big names up north, Ron Linder and the Linder family, along with all the big walleye guys, Gary Spiker and Bruce DeShano and all these guys, they were using these boards and they were using bottom bumpers. If you know what that is, a bottom bumper, it bumps across the bottom and all that. And then they found about this crappie fishing and said, we're pulling crankbaits, which we pull crankbaits for crappie. And in fact, some crankbaits you would never believe would catch crappie, big ones.
Oh, I'd believe it. I've seen some bass crankbaits bring in a crappie.
Well, we've caught lots and rattle traps that catch them, and Roadrunners definitely catch them. So, and all these guys in the Carolinas, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia, they're all pullers. They pull, and they have the science down. They've got to pull, and they do it so well. They've got it down. Well, Mark came out with this app that you put in this pound test line, you're going this fast, and you want to get down to this depth. So you can use that without boards and you can use it with boards. Well, Nick and Bruce came out with these weights. I'll call them weights, okay? They look like a crankbait, but they're not. They're tadpoles is what they call them. And they're molded in aluminum. And in that you can run these and you put them in between your board and your leader with your baits. Mm-hmm. And it will control the depth. So Mark went out and did testing with the board and the tadpoles, and then the pound test line, the speed and everything. Guess what? You can dial that thing up now. Instead of taking 60 feet behind the boat to get a bandit crankbait down to 10 to 15 feet, it doesn't matter how deep that crankbait goes by design. I can use that tadpole with the amount of speed in that app, and I can dial it in with about 10 feet.
Wow.
60 versus 10. So that gives me a tremendous amount of control in, with the pulling, where you don't have to make these wide turns and this stuff. If you're pulling and you want to go back down through an area and you've got this setup of points that you want to run a track on, you don't have to do that anymore. You can just run your track, but you can make your turns with the boards and all that. So we run 8 boards, 4 on each side.
Whoa.
And we will catch big crappie. And we pull crankbaits, we pull roadrunners, and roadrunners a big bait for pulling. And that's what I did in Florida. We did without tadpoles there because we wanted to get down only 2 feet, 1 to 2 feet under the surface. So to do a tadpole, you're not going to get enough speed to get that thing to keep it up. Mm-hmm. So we did it with, get a load of this. The leaders behind the boards were only 3 to 4 feet long.
And that doesn't bother the fish any?
No, didn't bother them. So we were running the boards on top and running them out away from the boat. We can run as far out from the boat as you want to. You can run them in close, you can group them close, and we tear them, and then you can run them way out, and you can run some deeper. And we've run them, we've caught fish down to 60 feet. 60 feet? Yeah.
I didn't think they would actually bite that deep for some reason.
Yeah. Whoa. Like the Ozarks up in Missouri, some of your deep lakes out there, they'll go down real deep. Right now in our local lake up here, Lake Jordan, they're in 20 to 30. Wow. They winter down there. So
now, in the wintertime, can you go out there and catch them that deep?
Yeah.
Okay.
But normally in the wintertime, though, pulling is weather related, and you don't want to pull until that water temperature gets above 50, gets to that 55, because then what happens is those big crappie, when that temperature on the surface is going to be the warmest, right?
Yeah.
In the summertime, they're going to want to get away from that because it's hottest at the surface, right? It can reach 80 to 90 degrees. So what they do is they go deep then. Well, in the wintertime, they go deep also, but that crappie love, their ideal temperature is 65 to 68. So what they're going to do is they're going to come up in the water column. And when I told you those fish start moving in, those females will rise in the water column and let that sun warm their backs. And when they get ready to spawn, remember how dark colored they get?
Yes.
The white, that's to attract sunlight. So that sunlight warms those fish, which allows those eggs in the females to mature. So when you go out there pulling in early spring, my editor for Crappie Now just did a video for the February edition, and he pulls a lot. He guides up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and he pulls a lot. And this time of the year, he'll pull a lot of times those big females on those warm days. If you get a warm stretch, you go up there and pull baits up in that water column, find out where they're sitting in the water column, and pull it above or through those fish. And you're going to catch fish.
I think it might be fair to say that if you only had one way to fish for crappie, it almost sounds like you prefer to pull with planer boards for them.
If they're on, pulling is not year round. You're going to get a window before they go in for spawn, and you're going to get a window in June and July when the fish are done spawning, mm-hmm. and they come out of the 2-week, what we call the weakness period after the spawn. And then they're going to go out there and they're going to feed like crazy. And a lot of them get in open water, and they'll go after those schools of shad. On LifeScope, we have actually seen now crappie or bass, either one, in the middle of big balls of shad, and there'll be this hollowed out part in the middle of it, and there'll be a crappie or a bass sitting right in the middle of it. And all they do is gobble down a shad here and there while they're in the center of it. And you'll see these shad bulge out and in, but they'll sit right in the middle of it. That's home, man. They can eat whenever they want to.
And crappie feed up, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Out and up. So they mainly like up. In Florida, when we fished down there a week and a half ago, they were all sitting on the bottom. They will sit when it gets real cold or real hot. They're going to sit right on the bottom. You can't even tell they're there. And then all of a sudden you'll see one dart off the bottom and come up and hit that bait. I screamed at it. I'm going to have, and Sue's over there, and she can testify, that we're going to get one just came off the bottom. I'm going to get one on pole one. She says, grab it because he's on there.
That's been a fun thing about ice fishing, watching your jig go down and you jig it a little bit and you can see the fish come right off the bottom and go poop. It's really fun.
It creates that excitement. You're going to go, man, they're going to come. They're going to come. And there they are. Now, I'm not animated or anything when it comes to that. You know, I'm known to be animated when that happens. Look, there's one. You know, my kids will kid me about it. It's the excitement thing, you know?
Oh, yeah. I think we all get excited when there's a fish bumping your lure. That's
no doubt.
Sean, you got to have a question. Or are you just along for the ride?
He's your note taker.
Yeah,
I'm taking notes. I'm watching the chat. I'm still stuck on crappie in 60 feet of water, wondering. I don't even think in Southern Ohio we have a lake that comes close to that deep until you get to Paint Creek or Rocky Fork. I think those two would be the closest. But
yeah, Paint Creek maybe.
Most of the time, it's most lakes that we fish aren't that deep either. But I mean, there was a time that Bruce and Nick DeShano were fishing Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri, and there's water 120 feet deep in there. And so and some other reservoirs too. Now it depends on the dead zone. You know, there's a dead zone, you know, that creates in the hot summer, nothing can get deeper than what the dead zone is because there's no oxygen.
Right.
So they're going to go out and find the depth that is the deepest, where the coolest water is, you know, because you get down 10 feet, you know, the temperature of the water changes radically. So
you can feel that when you're swimming, like if you're just floating on top. So
they're going to find that if it's 90 up here, they're going to find it wherever it's closest to that 68 to 70. Mm-hmm. You know, they're going to try to find that. And it has oxygen and food. So if they have all those factors, then that's where they're going to be.
One thing I've heard about crappie, I don't know if it's a myth or if it's true. You have to have a lake that is X amount of acres large to support a healthy crappie population, just because they're such prolific spawners. Is that true?
If you listen, yes, to some extent that is right. And it's true for most people that own lakes and ponds and that kind of thing, because they are prolific spawners. But I can tell you that it's true of bass, bluegill, or any species. If a water is not balanced, you know, where you have predator and bait, and you have the food chain, you got to have the itty bitty minnows, you got to have the bigger minnows, you got to have the crawfish, which are bottom scavengers that clean things up in your fishery. And then you've got to have the predators that help to keep the panfish and other fish and minnows in check. Because if any of those get out of balance, then what happens is you have an imbalanced water. And that's why we have to control our public waters, because if we clean out all the biggest fish, then we don't have, the chain's been broken. Okay. So you get bigger numbers, like a lot of our lakes have had big numbers of bass, big numbers of crappie and whatever, but they don't grow any bigger than this, right? Any bigger than small. And that's because they're overpopulated. Okay. They can't grow anymore. I've seen ponds. When I was a bass fisherman, I'd go to ponds and you couldn't catch a fish over 12 inches and they were paper thin. It was because they were overpopulated. They were annihilating the spawns of bluegill and minnows, and they couldn't keep up. So the same thing happens on crappie, only crappie are a little bit faster. Now, I'm going to tell you, it's all about, shall we say, helping to balance it. So if most pond and lake owners that I know, and many I don't know, but have them, they just think they let it go and it's going to balance itself and everything's going to be good. That is not true. Okay. you've got to keep check of, do you have enough? Is the water fertilized so that the bugs can grow, the right kind of bugs? And so those feed the minnows that feed phytoplankton. That phytoplankton's in there. That crappie, by the way, when they're spawning, phytoplankton is their big deal. If the phytoplankton blooms are not at the same time of the spawn, hatches of crappie will go to waste because they feed on phytoplankton.
Oh, the hatchlings feed on phytoplankton. Yes. Okay.
When they get a little bit longer, and they don't take them long, when they get a little bit longer during the year, they'll start feeding on insects and larvae and all that kind of thing. So if you put down like in a pond or a lake and you have a lot of ag around your pond or lake, and you're using some type of herbicide, or if you're using a bug control or whatever, that can get into your waterway. That creates an imbalance in there because your insects aren't there. Your minnows can't grow off of that. So the whole chain's broke, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a prolific spawn in crappie or bass and that food chain's broken down here, then you end up with an imbalance of growth and all that. So you want to make sure that you have a good phytoplankton, that it's got the right pH, that the lake has got the right pH. That creates that, and there's not herbicides and other things. Well, what happens on crappie, if you don't harvest crappie in a small water, just like you don't harvest bass, what we're finding now, and this is in studies, I'll leave the lakes out, but I know some DNR biologists, and we've done a lot of work on that. I've gotten info from them. They're some really smart people. And what they've shown me, and I've learned, is that if you don't harvest some of those fish, then what happens on the bass, they're finding in Florida and other places, we've gotten so good at catch and release that we've gotten overpopulations. So we now have some lakes where they want you to harvest certain sizes of fish so that we get that recruitment process down on bass as well as crappie. Okay. Well, if you get a pond or a lake and you don't harvest and you just let it sit there because it's beautiful, and which a lot of guys do, a lot of gals, what happens is that thing's mystique is that all of a sudden I go down there and I catch 100 small bass or I catch 100 small crappie and I never can catch a big one. The answer is you're overpopulated. Okay. So what you have to do is harvest. You've got to harvest in a normal. Now I'm going to tell you something that's going to break your heart. No, it's not. I have a 2-acre lake. I bought property here about a year ago, year and a half. We let everybody follow us on buying this property. We have had an acre, a little over an acre and a quarter lake, and we paid money to have it expanded. We dug out part of it. We did not drain it, whatnot. It was a catfish. We found out it was a channel cat and bluegill pond.
Okay.
And the catfish had gone unchecked for years. And the channel cat, were skinny. The bluegill were almost non-existent because they were being eaten up by the channel cat the whole bit. It was totally out of balance. And there was no bass in there, no crappie in there, just these what I call traditional bluegill. They're not hybrids, they weren't anything. So we went in and paid to have the dam reworked on part of it, a drain pipe put in right, and expanded it, made it bigger. It's now 2 acres, fully full. And I've put in mossback fish attractors because there was no structure in that lake at all, except a fence that went across. It was a horse pond. It was for race horses. And so they used it for watering, for drinking for the horse and exercise for the horse. There's a pole in the middle of it where they exercise horses. So it's about 10 feet deep. For the south, that's a good depth for down here, So it was just unchecked. So I had one, we call her Spot, one channel cat in there that was probably 8 pounds, but she didn't look 8 pounds because she was skinny as could be. So it would get grass in it when the summer got real hot. And so I put in 3 grass carp in there to help control the grass. I'm going to put a few more in because it gets pretty heavy in the summertime. And then I put in 200 hybrid bluegill, 200 shellcracker, and and then I put in mossback fish attractors. I have close to 30 or 40 of them in there, and I have them at different depths. So there's spawning ones on the edges, because I drained the pond down about 4 feet and put those in on the edges. So now we have it where they can spawn on them and protect the young ones. The minnows can get on them, and then I've got deeper ones. Well, I put in these bait fish and all that, and I said, okay, now I got to put in a feeder. I'm going to feed these fish. I put in a feeder, and then I then put in 30 crappie, and there's whites and blacks in there. I put in the biggest one's a white that's 2.5 pounds, the female, and I have them all the way down to probably 1.25 pounds that I put in there, and then I put in black crappie, also up to about 1.5 pounds. And so, one of my crappie died. I don't know why. Here during the winter, one of them died. I think a bird got to it. I have feeding birds that want to come and eat all my bait fish and whatnot now. So I put in the crappie, and I said, well, I don't want a lot of bass in there. So I caught a few spotted bass out of, and one largemouth out of a local lake while I was fishing for crappie. So I said, man, I'll put it in. So I put in a 2 pound, what's called Coosa spots, which grow big here. They're big and they're mean. And I put in about 5 of those and 1 largemouth. I have since caught the largemouth this fall, and that fish had grown 1 pound since I put her in less than a year ago.
Man.
And I then saw this year, so I must have male, female, little spotted bass about 2 inches long this fall. So I have a few spotted bass in there. And so and then I saw a couple of my crappie. So what I'm going to do is I've now got predator of crappie. I've got catfish that's predator of crappie. They eat small crappie. Mm-hmm. And so now my couple of big catfish have grown, and they're fat because I've been feeding them from a feeder, and I've now seen natural bluegill in big schools, what I call squadrons. And I also have hybrids now. I put in the hybrids. They were 4 inches long, right?
Yeah.
When I put them in last September a year ago. I'm now catching them up to they're 3/4 pound.
Man.
So it shows you. So now they'll be spawning, and that creates bait fish. And I have these little pond minnows, millions of them. This summer I had just millions of these things, and these crappie, bass, and catfish have been eating real good. I now have a balanced system in there. So when I start seeing little crappie in there, and I start seeing them getting up to 8-10 inches, something like that, I'm going to start harvesting, and I'll harvest those fish out. The key is harvesting. You got to control them. So I'll start harvesting them and go from there. So yeah, the reason they tell everybody that is if you have a small water is if you don't, and most people don't harvest and control them, they will get stunted, and you will end up with an over, because your water, depending on how fertile it is, can only handle so many fish per acre. So when you see studies, they're going to talk about how many fish load they can have per acre. If the combination is rough fish in that acre, and that's a predominant number, your game fish are going to be small. You're going to have smaller numbers. They found this out in Florida, down the lakes down there. So you got to look at that balance. So the answer is, for the normal Joe out there, yeah, don't put crappie in your pond or lake unless you're going to be an avid person that's going to harvest them and eat them. And the same thing with your bass. You need to check your bass population and catch them, because a lot of them do not control them.
Well, I'm telling you right now, I think I can speak for Sean too. If I had a crappie pond, I am eating crappie every day.
Amen. Our fryer will be plugged in, and we'll either air fry them with an air fryer, or the grease is going to be ready.
Oh, I'd have a cart. It'd stay right beside me.
Exactly. Are you saying you'd have a crappie pouch?
Yeah.
It's interesting that you talk about the harvesting thing, because I just sent an article to Sean today from Minnesota, and they were talking about their it's a managing big bluegill initiative.
Yeah.
And they're trying to figure out the appropriate number of fish that should be harvested, and then establishing slot limits at the same time. because what they figured out is overfishing causes the same problem as underfishing. And, in the past, what was it, like 70 or 80 years, they've seen their average bluegill size go down drastically.
And I think it was like they were regularly seeing either pound and a quarter or pound and a half bluegill way back on records from the 20s and 30s. And then now they're lucky to see bluegill over half a pound in their like fishing competitions and things.
That's when those fish come in on bed. A lot of times, and the same thing on crappie, people get ready to harvest and they want to catch all the big ones, because they'll fry out bigger. There's a bigger slab off of that, when you clean them. The problem with that is you can wipe them out, and people think you can't wipe out crappie and you can't wipe out bluegill, and you can. You think about the limits, and doing a slot limit is a great idea. Putting it where you can only harvest so many of the big fish, and leaving more of the medium range, which allows these fish to get bigger, and the food chain allows those fish to get bigger. It's been proven on crappie lakes everywhere. And if you get those numbers down, then your size goes up and your trophies go up. Example, in Mississippi, they've done trophy lakes in crappie, right? And they've gone in and made 12-inch limits for crappie. So you would think, okay, my gosh, I'll never catch a crappie that's a keeper. The answer is now we're catching so many fish right at 12 and just above 12 because they grow so fast here.
Yeah, that was the thing that surprised me about that article. They said it takes a mature male bluegill between 4 and 7 years to grow and get to its, like, where it stops bulking up, focusing on bulking up, and starts focusing on reproducing.
Right.
Crappie are a little bit faster, but I didn't realize that, because in Ohio, Sean, there's no bag limit for bluegill, is there?
I don't think so. Sunfish of any kind, I don't think. And crappie is like 30 per person per day.
And it's a 9-inch minimum.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, me and my buddy have never had trouble going out and catching at least a 9-inch crappie, but they're not fat. They're skinny. No. And I mean, I guess as an angler, you have to use your own judgment. Do you keep a fish just because it's legal, or do you selectively harvest what's going to be best for the environment?
I think those slot limits are a good deal, because what it does is, if you have and the DNR biologists will know this, if you have a large yearly recruitment process, and a lot of the lakes that I fish have those, then, but you don't have a large number of big fish that are over 12 inches and above, that means they're keeping all the ones that are up here at the big size and not letting them go. So those are your effective breeders, that are being caught. Same thing on bluegill. Those are your effective, breeders. So what you want to do is take out the middle, which are just as good to eat. You can catch large numbers of them. You just have to catch a few more, than you would great big ones, because you could catch 10 great big ones and have your meal without catching 30, but people won't stop there. I'm seeing limits now, and I have actually worked with DNRs and with some groups to advocate for tighter controls on crappie and sizes and whatnot. But I rely on the biologists to come in with their data as far as telling us, is the fish population supportive of a slot limit, or is it more of up here, or is it, are the numbers recruiting? If they're not recruiting, then you've got a bad system. You've either got, I'll give you an example. In Tennessee, you've got some of these old reservoirs, and Ohio has those too. A lot of these states have old reservoirs that were built by the Corps back in the 50s, right? And they're clear impoundments where the phytoplankton doesn't grow as well. Yeah. So when they're that clear, like Dale Hollow, and I could name off a whole bunch of them. And what they found, a lake right near me is one of them, Lake Martin, where they put dams way upriver. So the sediment, although good that you don't have sediment, but also the rich waters of backwaters where phytoplankton and that fertile water gets into the river is blocked. It's going to another reservoir above. So what comes out below is very more cleansed water with not as much fertilizer, in it to help phytoplankton grow. And so what happens is the baby fish die before they reach the age of 1 month. So, and that's a recruiting process problem. So that's one thing to look at. So what they do, they came out with a hybrid bluegill that has a black stripe on its back that they were growing in the fish hatcheries. And those fish hatcheries, they were augmenting those fish with they're called black nose crappie. In Mississippi, they're called magnolia crappie. And they're different. Well, we didn't think they're going to get big. Now we're catching magnolia crappie. I caught one last fall, it was 2 pounds. So they will get big. And they said, well, they won't spawn. I have not seen where they spawn. So, but they're putting them in those lakes like Dale Hollow and Hickory in large numbers, hugely successful, because now you're filling the gap when they get to that 2 inches to 4 inches. They're putting them in at that because at that point they're eating insects. Well, the insects are there, tiny minnows, but they can't get to that next push because of the photoplankton. So most lakes don't have that problem, but some do. So go with the fish biologist. They'll tell you, if a slot limit's more appropriate, if you need to have what's called a large fish control so that those big fish will happen. Florida learned that the hard way. Harris Chain of Lakes was where it used to be one of the most awesome bass fisheries in the world. And it went on its knees. And there was 2 reasons. It was over-fertilized. And due to all of the plantations, all of the fertilizer places, that are upriver, cows, cattle, horses, you name it, it polluted, basically water pollution. It was too overpopulated with all that stuff. And then the rough fish got stronger, and you had more rough fish to include tilapia at large numbers, and they would recruit. So what happened? Lower amounts of game fish. Crappie were suffering, bass were suffering, bluegill were suffering. So they went in and did huge nettings, got rid of the gar, carp, catfish that were rough catfish, and any tilapia, and they gave it to the poor. They flayed a lot of them, and then others they used as ground fertilizer, which is perfect fertilizer for the ground. Sure. So they chopped them all up, and they took out millions of pounds. And guess what? The water cleared up to a point. And all of a sudden, the bass populations now, Griffin and all those lakes down there that used to be big bass things, BASS is fishing them again. They got big fish in them again. They balanced the fishery. So anyway,
I've got about 20 minutes before I've got to go pick up kids from school. So I want to spend this last little bit of time maybe talking about rigging and getting some rods and reels set up. So we've alluded to them. I want to go ahead and talk about Roadrunner just a little bit.
Sure.
If you're tossing a Roadrunner, how are you going to rig that up? What kind of pole? What pound test? Kind of run us through that. And while you're doing that, I've got to run upstairs real quick. I'll be right back.
Okay. What I like to do on the Roadrunner depends what I'm going to do with those Roadrunners, and it depends on the technique. So if I'm going to cast Roadrunners or pitch them using live scope now, a lot of the guys, what they're doing is they're taking a 6 to 7 foot rod if you're not shooting docks, and they're pitching it, and they're pitching the bait or casting it. And what we're doing is we're targeting fish on live scope, and that big fish is sitting out 20 feet, 30 feet from us, or a school of crappie out from us. And we're going to cast beyond them, let it arc back into them. So when I rig it, usually when throwing, if I'm going to use a 32nd ounce or a 16th ounce, that's going to change my line diameter I'm going to want. So I like to use gamma line. I love gamma line. And I will use, I don't mind using high vis. It's chartreuse because the fish like chartreuse. But I will use clear if the water is real clear. I'll go to clear. And I'll downsize my line. So it really depends on how deep they are that I'm going to cast to them or pitch to them in that method. And so I'll use a 16th ounce Roadrunner, or I'll use a smaller 32nd ounce if I want to slow that drop down so that those fish, they're a little more lethargic. It's cold water. I'll then pick off of Team Crappie one of the baits that has hair instead of plastics, and go with it if it's really cold water. When it starts warming up, I'll go to plastics, and I love to use the pre-rigs that they have, the Crappie Tamer and among others. and so I'll go from the hair jigs to the plastics. Now, I'm going to tell you, hair jigs will work all year long. So I like to rig them. I'll directly tie them to 4 to 8 pound test line on those rods and reels, and I use a balance set of a B&M just came out with a number 50 reel, spinning reel that's smaller than their 100 series, and that 50 is perfect for that finesse. And that TCB B&M pole, that rod is awesome for. In fact, I'll be showing that rod tonight, using it to demonstrate to people in the aisles and that kind of stuff tonight. And I love to use it for that purpose. If I'm going to go to pushing, to trolling, and using spider rigging, I'll use double rigs, and unless they're real shallow. If the fish are real shallow at the spawn, I'll go to single jig heads with Roadrunners, just tied directly to the end of the line, and use 10 pound test line for that. And I'll use a Gamma High Viz, which is a chartreuse line. If they're deeper, I'll use what's called double rigs. There's on the Roadrunner side, they have now the stackers. They're called the stacker baits, and you can see those in their catalog or online. They're called stackers. And on the bottom of them, you've got a hair jig or a Roadrunner, and then on the top, you've got a true turn hook that's in line that you can put live bait on. And the other thing I like to do, and I've done this successfully for many years, is I tie my own rigs, and I will use the pre-ties. They've got leaders by True Turn, with True Turn, either with True Turn hooks on them or the Team Crappie hooks on them. And I love True Turns, and I will use the leaders that they have, the pre-tied leaders that they have, and I'll put those to a 3-way swivel that's tied to the main line, and that 3-way is a Thunder Mist 3-way. I won't use anything but Thunder Mist. They are true 360, and they're out of northern U.S. By Iacocca. There's just look up Thunder Mist 3-ways and swivels. They are true swivels. They're not the kind that your line's going to get like at Walmart. You get these 3-ways that are cheap 3-ways, and the line will bind into the beads that are onto them. These aren't. So I'll use the 360, these Thunder Mist. I use a 30 weight 3-way. They have them in different sizes. For walleyes, a 50, a catfish, and it goes all the way down to tiny. And I like a number 30. And I use that. I put my pre-tied leader from Roadrunner in there on the top, which is for live bait, and down below I'll tie a Roadrunner, one of the other Team Crappie heads on there, whether I'm going to use hair or plastics, and then on the Roadrunner I'll use a bobby garland plastic for the most part. And that's my rig. And then I like to use minnows on my jigs if they want minnows. Sometimes they don't. But if they want minnows, I'll use a minnow up on the True Turn and down on the bait below if that's what they want. If not, I'll leave a minnow off the jig and let them hit the jig and put a minnow on the top. But the fish will tell me which way to go. When I'm pulling, I really, I like a lot of the lineup in Roadrunner. So I will use, if I'm not using crankbaits, I will use Roadrunners on every rod, and I'll pull Roadrunners. And here's something else you can do for panfish. If you like to bluegill fish and all that,
Mm-hmm.
They were developed for ice fishing for Roadrunner and other companies. Bobby Garland has a tiny little baits for ice fishing. It's called the Itty Bit. And the Itty Bit body is got all the same styles of plastic that you get in the big bodies, but they're less than an inch long, and they're real small. You can put those on the small Roadrunners, the 1/32 ounce, and use those, or use the tiny little Roadrunners that come for the Panfish series. And those things I catch everything on. So if if in the springtime you finally have the shad hatch, before the shad hatch, your bait fish are going to be bigger, so crappie will feed on whatever the shad size was from the previous year that made it through the winter, or spawns of what's going to be spawning in the lake first. So they're going to eat whatever's coming. Well, if they're eating little bitty minnows and that kind of thing, guess what you're going to do? You're going to match the hatch. So on your Roadrunners, I like to use this new weedless Roadrunner. If I'm going to cast with it, I was telling you about casting earlier. I wanted those weedless Roadrunners so bad for years, and I begged West for them for all those years. And we finally devised them 2 years ago. We went through a whole year of testing, and we had George, who's a lure designer out of Bobby Garland, with us, and we came up with those slab runners that you see now. And we have them in weedless and non-weedless. Well, guess what we developed those for? Casting to laydowns, trees. Guess what happens with a Roadrunner if you bring it through a tree and you're not reeling it and not burning it? It's going to get hung most of the time, right? And if you're using a Pro Series that doesn't have the bendable hook, the 2.0, it's going to get hung up and you ain't going to get it loose. You're going to contribute it to the tree. So I wanted something that I could take it, throw it to the tree, or bring it in with spider rigging where I could bump over those limbs and come inside of them when those fish are inside. If you see those fish on the inside of a brush pile or on the inside, go to this weedless, and they've got little wire arms on them. They're very flexible. And the one thing I don't like about traditional weed guards, I just did a video on this. It's going to be in Crappie Now. We trim those normal fiber weed guards down to 2 strands usually, or 3, and we usually make them where they're kind of bent to the left and right of the hook, right? Because crappie mouths, they don't bite like a bass. So when you bring it in, if you don't do that, you're going to miss the fish most of the time. So if you do what I'm talking about, where you trim it back level with the hook at an angle and you spread it to just 2 of them, then you can do that. Well, we devised the weed guard that does not inhibit hook penetration, but lets it glide over limbs in that. So you can work that bait through the limb, let it drop, work it through the limb, let it drop. And guess when they hit it?
On the drop?
Yeah. Yeah, almost every time. They're there. You see them on that machine. If you bring it to them like that, they can't resist it. As long as you got the right color and it matches the hatch.
Yeah.
So, there's hyper grubs out there. There's the baits that are in the Team Crappie lineup that are for every one of those styles of fish. So I like to rig them like that on the spider rigs. And on pulling, I'll a lot of times, like Grenada Lake, where we're catching 3-pound crappie, 2 to 3 pound crappie. They have mouths on them this big. Okay. A whole bandit crankbait can go inside that mouth. In fact, a G3 crankbait will go in that. And that's your biggins. That's a crankbait that's a 3-inch above.
Good grief.
So
I can't even imagine that.
So what you want to do is we're using 1/0 hooks for those fish. Okay.
Really?
On jigs.
Wow.
Yeah. So I want to tell you, so what you want to do is when you're pulling them like that, I'll go to an 1/8 ounce jig head and put me a 2 to 3 inch plastic on there, like a Swim R plastic that's from Bobby Garland. There's a new plastic out with it that's a 3-inch for crappie that is from Bobby Garland also, and it was all devised for that purpose to pull. And then I love the hyper grubs they just came out with because they're. And the other bait I like to use pulling on my Roadrunners is strollers from Bobby Garland. I will use strollers. And the next thing you're going to ask is color. Because I get asked.
Monkey milk's all I ever go with.
Monkey milk Glacier. Monkey milk's been used so much. Monkey milk is a multi-million-dollar seller. So
because it's just you can catch fish
all around. But I'm going to tell you the latest colors.
Okay.
Because fish get used to seeing things, so you got to kind of modify them. Glacier has been a big color, which is a modification of that. It looks like a glacier. You look at it, it's got like little spikes of blue in it. Okay, it's like a milky white. And the other big color has been blue ice. Blue ice is if people are looking for blue ice, they want to buy blue ice because blue ice has more sparkles in it. Now, if you get muddy water, you want to go to oranges and whites and black and chartreuses but my other color beyond those colors is black and chartreuse, black and pink. So if you gave me a box and said you get 8 colors, I would pick black chartreuse, black pink. I would pick the colors we just mentioned. I would go to pink and chartreuse, which is Cajun cricket is orange and chartreuse. I would go to barbecue chicken, a color called barbecue chicken. Yeah, it's called barbecue chicken. Got Bobby Garland. And all those colors with pink and chartreuse are really good. And if I'm going to pick my chartreuse, I don't want a straight chartreuse. I would love to have silver glitter in it.
Okay.
So if you're going to go to silver glitter, and what it does in light, if you put it underneath a light, you were to shine it on a piece of paper, when you have glitter in a bait, it's going to look like black spots. So what does that mean to a fish? It means this fish is damaged. So if it's damaged, that means that fish is hurt, so they can eat it easier. So it becomes something that, so I like, I've always had great success. I tried a new bait I can't mention yet from Roadrunner in my pond that I tried last fall, and he gave me 1 plastic and 1 bait. And I cast that thing. I was catching hybrid bluegill left and right. They would not let that bait alone. The other bluegill will chase it and bite the tail, but the hybrid bluegill will eat it. I mean, just eat it. They couldn't stand it. I mean, and my crappie were way out in the deep, so I didn't even fish for them. But I can tell you, so that had a part of the tail was chartreuse with that silver glitter.
Yeah.
So I will choose that. And then there's a lot of other colors I like, but if I was only to get those colors would be my basics. And black and chartreuse is a color you can't go wrong on. I don't care where you go. My river here, the Alabama River, black and chartreuse, black pink. Black and chartreuse has probably been the number one. Cajun cricket, barbecue chicken, those kind of things.
Dan, I could sit here for the rest of the afternoon and talk crappie fishing with you, but unfortunately I can't. I know, kids, blah, blah, blah. You mentioned very briefly Crappie Now. So you're the publisher of Crappie Now, right?
Yes, sir.
What's the website where people can go check that out?
www.crappienow.com.
And I assume it's free.
Yeah, it's free for the reader.
Good.
And we publish once a month, first of each month. It's a website, so they're not going to see a physical magazine that they turn, even online. So what we did is a resource where they can go in and search on a topic, but the latest edition will be on the front page with all the top articles and the videos. We have close to 400 how-to videos, so they can search topics and it'll bring up the topic. If you want to go about casting, you want to go, you can search by all kinds of stuff.
And I assume your Instagram handle is Crappie Dan?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a YouTube page where you do tutorials and tips?
It's all DD Outdoor.
DD Outdoor.
DD Outdoor or Crappie Now.
Okay. I think
Facebook page is either Crappie Dan, Crappie Mates, that's Sue and I, or Dan Dannenmueller Senior. If they go without the senior, they'll get this Snap-on sales manager from the Midwest. It's my son.
But it might be fun sending him crappie questions. I don't know.
He'll probably laugh and send you back to you and say, I think that's my dad.
Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Maybe later in the fall we can hook back up and go over some
Anytime you guys want to do it, you let me know. I'll be here for you.
All right. Dan, have a good evening.
You too. You guys have fun.
Thanks, sir.
Be safe. Be safe. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. God bless you.
Thank you.